Today I'm going to introduce you to a technology we've been using to represent landscapes with many applications in the geosciences. And this is going to be an overview of an augmented reality sandbox and how this sandbox can be used in geography. So the sandbox itself is a raised structure filled with 200 pounds of sand. This just regular white sand. And it was built in-house, received a fair amount of customization. And the idea behind the sandbox is that changes to the surface, if you go modify the sand, these changes are captured by a series of sensors. Sensors communicate, talk to a computer. Computer then processes the information sent by the sensors and then sends outputs to a projector. Projector then projects the results of processing on top of the sand. And this is done in near real time, and it's a very immersive and very responsive system. So to achieve that, we use two Xbox Kinect sensors. These are the same sensors people use for gaming. When you're gaming, you have these sensors mounted horizontally facing you, and that's how you interact with the game. Well, here, we mounted the sensors so they face downwards, and they face the surface of the sandbox. For this activity, I'm going to show you a series of representations of this particular landscape. This is a mountain with a valley, and how this landscape then can be captured by this device. We usually, in geosciences, we need to represent elevation or use elevation with other terrain descriptors, for instance, the slope, to describe and understand the landscape and processes associated with this landscape. And we've been using topographic maps for that, and they carry elevation information. But in addition to topographic maps, then we are using this device. And to start with, one thing we can do is we can load an image that represents this particular landscape in shades of gray. And this is where we can start thinking about the landscape and how we see these different landforms. Because the Kinect sensor is continuously scanning the surface. If you change this particular landscape, the system will change accordingly. One of those strategies involves the use of contour lines. And these are lines of same elevation. As I showed before, we do have still the shades of gray being draped on top of the sandbox, but now we also have these contour lines. And if you follow a contour line, you're going to always be at the same elevation. And as before, if you change this particular landscape, the system will change and redraw contour lines as well. Contour lines are being created by the system, but if you want to change how the system distributes contour lines over this particular landscape, you can basically define or redefine the vertical distance between the contour lines. So here's an example of a very small distance between contour lines. We usually don't have contour lines this dense, but just to show you as an example that this is a possibility. This seems to be a better representation of this particular landscape using contour lines, more dense than the first example I showed you, and less dense than the second example, but it seems to have a good number of contour lines showing detail and representing all the variations that presented by this landscape. So now let's think about the relationship between these contour lines and terrain. For instance, what type of terrain would have contour lines that are closer to each other? An interesting aspect of the sandbox is that it allows for experimentation. So you can try creating landscapes and parts of this landscape that have higher density or lower density. And I'm going to do this now here. So for this, I'm going to try and create an area that has lower density. And here, I'm going to try and create an area that has higher density. People sometimes think about the relationship between contour lines and elevation. And again, the sandbox allows for experimentation and see exactly if these relationships exist and what these relationships are. We can perhaps create contour lines that are far apart or higher elevations. Sometimes contour lines are close to each other, lower elevations, and we can also create contour lines that are far apart at a lower elevation than contour lines that are close to each other at higher elevation. So now you have a combination of two ways we can represent this particular landscape using color and using contour lines. And as I showed before, the system is very responsive. If you change the landscape, the system will redraw the contour lines and also will change the color for particular areas. Another interesting aspect of this implementation is that if you place your hand above maximum elevation for the model, your hand becomes a cloud and you rain. So what I just did here, I filled this area with water